Jesus taught freely in the temple, and he had every right to do so. After all, it was his Father's house. But do you know that the religious people actually tried to shut him up? They wanted to say, "You are not authorized. You don't have a permit to do this." But Jesus had a stunning reply to them. And I want you to hear that reply on today's podcast.
Welcome to Everyday Truth with Kurt Skelly. We believe the Bible is true and relevant to everyone, everywhere, every day. If today's conversation is a help to you, take a moment to leave a review or share it with a friend. Thanks for listening. Now, let's join Kurt for today's episode.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode. Appreciate your faithfulness to the Lord and to this podcast. Looking forward to verse number 23 of Matthew 21. We're talking about a bunch of little stories in the life of Jesus that took place in the final week of his life. So when you think about that final week, think about Sunday, Palm Sunday, but then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, these were days of conflict as Jesus went to the temple and helped the people whom you would expect for him to help, poor people and blind people and lame people and those that would listen, the common man. But it was also a time of great adversity because the religious leaders and those that worked for them were really opposed to Jesus. He was upsetting their apple cart. Remember, he's already driven out the money changers, so he's affecting their supply line and their money. And there is this increased tension day by day. And we're going to find a little bit of that here in the next few parables that Jesus tells. So would you look at verse number 23, where it says, "And when he was come into the temple, the chief priests and the elders of the people came unto him." So wow, he has attracted great attention because these aren't just the officers, but these are the higher ups, the chief priests and the elders of the people. They came unto him as he was teaching. So they're interrupting. Can you picture that? So if you've ever been to Israel on what we call the Temple Mount, it's a huge, expansive place. And back in Bible days, there would be little groups here and there teaching and answering questions. Remember that the teaching back in those days was much more interactive. It was much more of a dialogue, asking and receiving questions. Remember that instance in Luke chapter 2 when Jesus was in the temple as a 12-year-old. That's a good example, how that he was asking and receiving questions. So it was very Socratic in that way. The asking questions, clarifying answers, much different than just lecturing like we do a lot of today. So Jesus is in a group, people around him, he's doing some teaching, and the chief priests and the elders, they interrupt him. And watch what they ask in verse number 23. "By what authority doest thou these things? Who gave thee this authority?" So they're trying to pull rank. Now, Jesus has already chased out the money changers a day before, so he's made it pretty clear that he considers himself to be authoritative over what happens in that temple. But these chief priests, these elders, they're coming and saying, "Hey, you don't have authorization to teach here. This is something that's reserved for those that have college degrees, those that have a pedigree." And indeed, that was what typically would happen at the feast times. The most famous teachers of the day, that would be from the most famous schools of the day, like the school of Hillel or the school of Shammai. They would come to the temple and they would teach, and they're like doing a favor to the people. Look at me, I'm a famous teacher. You get to hear me speak. And the chief priests and the elders, they come to Jesus and say, "Who do you think you are? Who gave you a permit to teach this open air teaching session?" And they're thinking that they're just going to shut down Jesus because humanly speaking, nobody gave him authority. Humanly speaking, he does not have a permit. Humanly speaking, they are in charge. So how will Jesus deal with these law enforcement people that are telling him that you can't continue to teach in this temple? Well, I love the answer. Verse number 24, and Jesus answered and said unto them, I also will ask you one thing, which if you tell me, I and likewise will tell you by what authority I do these things. Have you ever noticed how many times in the Bible Jesus answered a question with a question? So he knows their motives, obviously. And so he's asking a question that forces a response on their part so that he can demonstrate to them the disingenuousness. Wow, that's a big one, of their question. And so he asked them, authority. You have a question about authority. So I'll answer your question about authority if you answer this question. Verse 25, the baptism of John. John's ministry. That's what that means. The baptism of John. Whence was it? From heaven or of men? So tell me, the ministry of John the Baptist, was it authorized by heaven? Was it authentic? Or was he just an interloper? Was he just a guy that was spouting off his own opinion? Tell me, what was it? Now, here's what Jesus knows. Jesus knows that the chief priests have adopted this political opinion that we're gonna support John the Baptist's ministry publicly for a couple reasons. Number one, he's no longer alive. Herod Antipas has had him beheaded, so he's not a problem anymore. He was very popular among the people, but because he's not speaking anymore, we don't have to deal with him. So the best political position to take would be just to say, yeah, we're for him. John was a good guy. That way the people will like us because he's popular and we don't have to deal with him. That's the best middle ground position we can take. And remember, they're just politicians, and Jesus knows that. So he says, was he authentic or was he not authentic? Tell me. Now, here's the conundrum. The conundrum is if they say, and this was their political stance, if we say that, oh no, John was authorized from God, it's from heaven, then Jesus is going to follow up, and they know this. They're playing mental chess right now. And then Jesus is going to follow up and say, then why didn't you believe him? Because he spoke of me. He was my forerunner. He pointed to me. He said that I was the Messiah. So to say that you support John or that John's message was authorized, you're actually saying then I am authorized. So you are answering your own question about authority. You're saying that I'm authorized to speak. But if you don't answer that question, then I'm not going to answer your question. So they're really between a rock and a hard place. Now watch what they do. Now, this is so funny to me. Verse 25. And they reason with themselves. Now, can you picture this? So Jesus says to whoever the spokesman is this question, and they kind of call a huddle. So they're kind of having a powwow. They reason with themselves, saying, if we shall say from heaven, he will say unto us, why did ye not then believe him? But if we shall say of men, we fear the people. What a statement. They're willing to admit that to themselves. They're not going to admit that publicly. They're not going to admit that to Jesus. But in this powwow, they're like, well, if we say that John was not authentic, if we say that his message was not true, then we're kind of afraid of the people because the people really like him. So we want to say what's going to put us in the most favor with the people. I mean, they were people pleasers. And can I just say this? That's what fearing people is. Fearing people isn't that we cower around people. Fearing people is that we are overly concerned about what they think about us. That's why people pleasing really in its raw form is just the fear of man. And the Bible says the fear of man bringeth a snare. And that might be a little good side lesson for us, this podcast. And that is, how important is crowd approval in my life? How important it is for me. Sometimes I sacrifice truth, what I know to be true, because I want people to like me. That's what these religious leaders are doing. And religious people still do that today. Look at verse 26. if we shall say of men, we fear the people, for all hold John as a prophet. They answered Jesus and said, now watch what they say. We cannot tell. Now, we don't know. I mean, that's up for debate. Now, it's interesting. So they take a middle ground position. So they don't give him an answer. But what's interesting is they have an answer. They don't believe in John. They have an answer. So when they say we cannot tell, that's a lie. You think about how pathetic these religious leaders are. They want to get rid of Jesus. They really can't get rid of Jesus. They can't answer the teaching of Jesus. They can't explain the miracles of Jesus. They're trying to find some leverage, some authoritative way to get rid of Jesus. And Jesus poses this question. They don't really like John, but they have to take a public position that they do. They don't want to alienate themselves with the people, so they just lie. I mean, what a tangled web we weave when at first we practice to deceive and we cannot tell. And I love Jesus' answer in verse 27. And he said unto them, neither tell I you by what authority I do these things. So, hey, I'm just going to keep on teaching. You came to me with a bully tactic. You came to me and said, you need authority. You need to be authorized to teach here. And what I'm saying to you is I am authorized. And down deep on the inside, you know that because you won't even take a stand on my forerunner, let alone me. And Jesus continues to teach. Now, what's interesting is Jesus not only continues to teach, but he shifts his teaching from the crowd that he was teaching when he was interrupted to the interrupters themselves. So Jesus says, I'm not going to stop teaching. I do have authority, but I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to continue my teaching in this dialogue, question and answer format. And Jesus is about to show them just how hypocritical they are. So be careful when you put on the boxing gloves with Jesus. You're going to come out with a few bruises. And we're going to find out all about that next episode. I can't wait to tell you the parable that Jesus told them, but you'll have to wait until tomorrow. So that's it for today. Hope you have a great day in the Lord. God bless you, my friends.